Well, howdy, everyone, and welcome back to the Rancher Podcast. I am super excited about today's episode. We are starting a new series here about the Yellowstone prequel series 1883. This is a show that came out in the middle of November, December time last year. And, it's something that I know a lot of people were excited about to get more Yellowstone content. Of course, the reveal of the cast, including Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, and of course Sam Elliott, was also really exciting. And I think that this is a great show to build a historical commentary on. I know that after the first episode aired, I saw a lot of historians, both amateur and professional, kind of dogging on the show, for historical inaccuracy. But I don't really think that this show deserves so much criticism on that front, because of course it is, after all, a TV show built in, however real it looks, a fictional world. And maybe in the Yellowstone universe, this is how history in the United States played out, over 140 years ago. So I'm not going to come at this at this series in a problematic way. I just want to take some of the information that they provide and build on it so that you have a better understanding of what's going on in real American history at the time, and you can use Yellowstone 1883 as kind of a guidepost for that. It's quite an interesting show, and there definitely are some very historically accurate and interesting parts to it. So we're going to go episode by episode, but today's is more of a overall general background of what was happening in the United States around this time, what the U.S., specifically the West, looked like, in terms of technology, what were people doing, all these types of things, so that when you watch the show, you can have that background, that basis to really see what's going on and kind of understand the story a little bit better. I know it's been fairly small so far. It's focused just on trying to get this, immigrant trail set up and rolling up into the Northwest, but really excited to see where the series goes. It's interesting the impact that the series had, because I'm a subscriber of the Texas Historical Association, and they release a list every week of what were the most popular things that people looked for on their site. So, typically on holidays, people will look for events that happened, or when significant things like, the Texas Revolution are occurring, they'll look up the Battle of San Jacinto. And for the last few weeks, the top entry is something that I had never seen on there before, and that is, of course, Hell's Half Acre in Fort Worth, because I guarantee so many people wanted to learn more about the history of Hell's Half Acre after the first couple episodes of 1883. So it's pretty interesting the impact that this series has on the historical community and, of course, the equine industry. So I really want to thank the creator, Taylor Sheridan, for bringing this new perspective and this new opportunity to talk about American ranching history, because, as you all know, that is a passion of mine, and really am looking forward to working on this project of going into more detail. So, of course, right after a quick word from our sponsors, we'll get into a in-depth background of what was going on in America in the 1800s, and specifically the 1880s. Well, I'm proud to welcome the newest sponsor for the Rancher Podcast, and that is Elite Ranch Consulting. They are your one-stop shop for protecting your real estate investment. Whether you inherited a piece of land, bought a ranch as your vacation home, or are simply looking to maximize the land you are already working, Elite Ranch Consulting's team of experts can help you make the right decisions to make your land profitable. Visit EliteRanchConsulting.com today to learn more about how they can protect your American dream. So what exactly was happening in 1880s America? Well, if you'll remember from my stories on the Teddy Roosevelt in the Badlands. This was the first year that Teddy Roosevelt had actually traveled west for his hunting trip and eventual purchase of his ranch. So if you remember, it was kind of a precarious time in the plains specifically because railroads were starting to cut up this land to make travel from the East Coast to the West Coast faster. You already had major cities developing in California, Oregon, and these places, and the center of the country, the plains, was kind of left behind. People were rushing out to gold sites on the West Coast, and it had left the middle of the country in this very strange position. Native Americans were being moved from all over the United States to Oklahoma's Indian Territory, and the Indian Removal Act, these policies that started in the 1830s, and they were really, the conflicts were coming to an end. Custer's stand was in the late 1870s, and by 1881, Sitting Bull had actually surrendered to the United States military at Fort Buford in Montana. So really, the major conflicts were over, but that is not to say that there weren't to be more skirmishes between the new Anglo settlers and the Native Americans in the area. But to give you a little bit more historical perspective, the shootout at the OK Corral had actually happened in 1881 as well. So, of course, Sam Elliott's character Virgil, all of that had happened before. I guess he had become a cattle rancher and immigrant mover in Texas. But in 1882, President Chester A. Arthur had actually signed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which said that no one from the mainland China or any other Asian countries was really able to migrate to the United States. So immigration was huge at this time, to the point that they were trying to stop people such as individuals from China from even migrating here. And some more interesting numbers on immigration. About 600,000 Swedish folks immigrated to America at this time. And, again, the railroads were laid by Chinese, Scandinavian, and Irish immigrants. And so it was a very interesting time. The group of immigrants that we meet in 1883, I believe, are from Austria and Germany. And so there was, of course, a lot of migration from these groups, and ultimately, these were the favored groups. The more likely, the English, the Anglo folks, were preferred because they already spoke English and were typically Protestant. But you saw this major distrust and dislike of immigrants from other places besides Northern Europe. So it certainly falls in line that this large group of immigrants would be able to come into the country because they were of the European persuasion. But a few more details. Like I said, Chester A. Arthur had become the president in 1881 after President Garfield was assassinated. And interestingly enough, Chester A. Arthur was kind of a they always call him the most forgettable president, which, I mean, say what you will, mediocrity, I guess, is better than being the most hated or whatnot, but he definitely was not a very memorable president. There was not much that went on in his 4 years, and, interestingly, he didn't have any policies that he signed that were major besides the Chinese Exclusion Act. So, furthermore, as I mentioned, the Indian Wars were really over. The Battle of Little Bighorn in 1870s was really their biggest final victory. Everything went downhill from there. But an interesting instance that I wanted to cover was that a group of Cheyenne actually had been driven to Oklahoma with the rest of the Cheyenne from Montana in 1878, and a few hundred of them actually tried to make it back to Montana in the late 1870s, and they split off into two groups at about 150 each, and one of the groups actually did make it back to Montana. And I think that just is a really interesting little anecdote that kind of paints the the tumult of the time. That there was a lot going on. A lot of people were moving, resettling, settling in new lands. They were being pushed out, and nothing was settled, I guess, is to reuse that word. Nothing was really concrete at the time. There were a lot of people who were trying to build fortunes and ranches and their manifest destiny in the western United States, which is what we're seeing with the Dutton family here in the show 1883. So I think it's a great period for the show to cover. Of course, a lot of the stuff that we typically tie to this migration happened earlier. The Oregon Trail had started in the 1830s, and California had already been taken from Mexican control by the end of the 1840s, and the 1849er gold rush had occurred, and by this time, even Wyoming and Montana and Nevada, there was gold being found. So it was a very, very tumultuous time. I can't stress the use of that word enough, because law was being subsumed by greed and by passion and desire, and it really made it a very difficult place to make a life. But if you were successful, of course, it was something that could pay dividends for not only you but your family for generations to come. Specifically in Montana, the town of Livingston was platted in 1882. So you did have cities, and you did already have railroads throughout the territory by the time Yellowstone 1883 is occurring. The country had actually not been fenced over like much of the rest of the plains had been at this time, so it was certainly still feasible that the Duttons could have made their way up there and staked out land before the ultimate, is the late 1880s, after the crash of the cattle market and whatnot, that people started fencing in their land and getting more protective of what they owned. But another story or another character from real life that I wanted to bring to your attention as we start looking at this story is a man by the name of Nelson Story. And if you're from Montana, if you're from the upper Midwest, Northwest, you might know this name. I don't think a lot of people in the rest of the United States do, but he's kind of considered a founder or father of Montana. And what essentially had happened is he had been born in Ohio, and he'd moved out with the gold rush into Montana territory in the 1860s, and he'd made a little bit of money doing it, and he learned that the real money was actually going to be made by the folks who were selling stuff to the miners. Because you go into these boom towns and you walk into the general store, and a pickaxe might cost 500 times what it cost you back on the East Coast, or food was absolutely outrageous. And so he had an idea to bring the first herd of cattle down from the south, from Texas, all the way up into the Montana territory and sell it to folks up there. And he did that, and there was the first drive into Montana territory in 1866. And if you've watched the episodes that have been released so far, you'll know that they do decide to carry cattle up with them to Montana at this time. And so I think that is a bit of a nod to Nelson's story and his historic drive from Fort Worth to Montana territory. And I really want to get into that story more in a Legendary Ranchers episode. I've actually been working on Nelson's Stories episode for a while, and it's kind of like the Goodnight one. It's taken me a long time because he lived a very colorful life, and really, really excited to get that one out, but wanted to share that anecdote with you to think about as you're watching 1883. One, last thing that I want to talk about that really helps set the stage for what's going on in America at this time, of course, is in the first few episodes, it plays a major part, and that is smallpox. There had been a vaccine around for smallpox since 1800, and it had been innovated and redone and made stronger in the years since then, but that really didn't immediately eradicate the disease. I found a story, interestingly enough, from the year 1898 about the riot in Laredo, Texas, down on the border, because there had been an outbreak in hundreds of people had gotten smallpox in this town, and so the state had actually ordered the forced vaccination and fumigation of all homes, along with the burning of any what they called suspect clothing. And a riot had broken out because the Texas Rangers were actually sent into town to assist in this mass vaccination. So it's really not out of the realm of possibility that the folks in Yellowstone 1883 were having to deal with smallpox, because although there was a vaccine, of course, access to medicine of that type was not really necessarily readily available in the more remote parts of the western United States. But another interesting fact about smallpox is that Germany had actually implemented compulsory vaccination for smallpox in 1874. So if you were a German citizen, you had to be vaccinated for smallpox. And interestingly enough, their neighbor, Austria, did not have that. So there were all kinds of studies and interesting information about the impact on the German population versus the Austrian population. And if you remember, as I mentioned, I've looked up and it says that most of the immigrants in 1883 were from Germany and Austria. So if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to go watch it. But those of you who have, of course, the scene where they're inspecting the immigrants and some of them have smallpox, it makes it more interesting to know that if that might be a telltale of which ones were from Germany and which ones were from Austria, because if you were from Austria, you much more likely to have smallpox than the German immigrants. But I just wanted to bring a good background on the history and the current events that were going on at the time, and just mention that although this story does play fast and loose with timelines and historical facts, I think that it's a great way to start a conversation on this beautiful and incredible time in our nation's history. So I'm really looking forward to this series. And if you have any input, any comments, or you know anything, or if you find anything you want to point out to me from the show, it's one of those shows that to catch the true historical significance, you've got to watch it a few times and try and pick up on all the facts. But please feel free to email me or DM me on Instagram or Facebook with those details, because I'd love to get into those more as we move through the future episodes. And of course, if you have any positive or negative impact on the show or input on the show, please let me know. I would love to hear everyone else's perspectives. I know, like I said, that many historians were concerned about the accuracy of some of it, but I think overall it's a great way, it's a great vehicle to talk about American history. And so I thank Taylor Sheridan for that. Of course, it's also nice that we will have Yellowstone 1883 for a little while longer now that the Yellowstone main series has ended its fourth season, and so we'll have a little bit of Yellowstone history to tide us over until the show comes back. But thank you all again for listening, and I appreciate all of your support for the show, and thank you for holding with me as I made my way through a new job in the holiday season, and I really look forward to getting into new topics and new information and having great guests throughout 2022. Stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of great information, and I've got a lot of great ideas for new shows and topics. So, of course, if you have any input, please feel free to reach out with your favorite topics or interviews or guests that you would like me to talk to. But until next time, Godspeed and God bless.